to ask everybody, sorry, just you probably all see the recording. So just want to make sure everybody knows that this session is recorded. It's nice to see such a great turnout early in the morning at 9 a.m. But we are going to share this recording with many other people in the community and many who has shared that they cannot make it this morning today. So I think it's going to be a really meaningful conversation. So without further ado, I just want to quickly share that we're going to start with a few moderated questions for our panelists. And I'm going to introduce our panelists in a moment. And then we're going to have at least a good, hopefully 10, 15 minutes for audience Q&A, depending on the time. But if you have any thoughts or messages, feel free to type it in the chat. So first of all, a quick introduction. I think our panelists really don't need much introductions, but still want to make sure that we know who they are and their expertise on this very important topic. The first one is Mayor Hurley, who is actually in his 7th year as mayor of Burnaby, re-elected to second term, actually acclaimed in 2022, which is very rare in municipal politics to be acclaimed as a mayor. But before serving as a mayor, he was a Burnaby firefighter and served as the president of the Burnaby Firefighters Association and also the president of the BC Provincial Firefighters Association. And in 2002, he also received the Queen's Golden Jubilee Medal and the Platinum Jubilee, and for his services in the community. Our second panelist is Lorraine. Lorraine Copas is the executive director for the Social Planning and Research Council of BC, SPARC BC, as many of you know. Lorraine has an extensive background in community social planning and capacity building and has had an extensive career in working in housing and homelessness, who also has a master's degree in public policy and public administration. And for the past 15 years, Lorraine has led SPARC BC, where she's worked with people and communities across BC on a range of social policy issues and challenges, including accessibility, inclusion, income security, poverty reduction, housing, homelessness, as well as climate change. Lots of experience there, Lorraine. Thank you so much for joining us. And our third panelist, but not the least, is Jade Haughian, is the manager of the Douglas Shelter, a low barrier harm reduction focused shelter here in Burnaby. She previously managed the Tri-Cities Winter Shelter and has extensive experience in supporting housing and frontline services. Jade's work is grounded in trauma-informed care and community collaboration, with a strong commitment to supporting vulnerable and unhoused individuals with dignity and compassion. And thank you so much to our three panelists to join our event today. So I'm going to start with some questions, and I love grassroots work and bottom-up style, so I would love to start this conversation with our first question to Jade, who is working on the front lines on a daily basis, serving our vulnerable neighbors. So Jade, can you please share with us what are you seeing on the ground and how is progressive housing and many other grassroots organizations and workers like you responding to homelessness and other challenges in our communities?
Yeah, for sure. I think we're seeing deepening poverty and a widening gap between the income and the cost of living, especially where it pertains to unaffordable rents. And of course, a significant shortage of safe housing options. Since COVID, we've also seen more uptake in immigration and refugees. And then, of course, the growing mental health struggles that impact people's ability to be employed and their general quality of life. In Burnaby, the landscape has changed significantly. Prior to 2019, there was no shelter. Now we have more supports, more services, more partners, and of course, more data collection. I think that we have responded through collaboration, of course, bringing low barrier shelter models, and of course, a focus on culturally responsive and relationship-based care.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Jade. And that would lead to my second question for our panelist, Lorraine. Since Lorraine has worked provincially and has worked with many communities across BC, what are some of the data, especially as Jade has connected to some of the factors of, the increasing number of services and the needs and the complexity of the needs? Lorraine, can you share a little bit about data across BC, especially for people who are homeless, but also people who are vulnerable?
For sure. Um, when I think of homelessness, I see it as a very complex problem, and there's many different factors that play into it. When you look at the data question, you're looking at individual circumstances, but you're also looking at structural market conditions that are making people more vulnerable, and then systemic challenges as well. And so when we had the last homeless count here in the Metro Vancouver region, we saw an increase in the number of unsheltered homeless, and it was a very significant increase, um, and an increase overall. Burnaby saw the same type of increase. So you for every time that rents increased by $100 a month, they knew they would see an increase in the number of people experiencing homelessness. So I think that those are some of the numbers and some of the data that as community we have to start to put together to really understand how you can help individual people at the individual level, people through the market, through the housing that we're able to provide, or that local governments can step into that space. And I think then finally, it's really important to consider that civil society has a role to play too, that we have to understand it is connected to poverty, that homelessness is part of an income problem as well, and a social safety net problem. And so when you put the whole picture together, there are many points to press on, but at the end of the day, you want to think about the person behind those numbers.
100%. And I do apologize. I lost my connection there a little bit. So if there was a disruption, feel free to let me know. But I'm glad that I came back and caught on the most important thing that Lorraine was mentioning about. And Lorraine, you mentioned about, right, municipalities and government's role as well. So I'm going to bring up Mayor Hurley, of course, to see if Mayor Hurley, after what you've heard, from Jade and from Lorraine, what are some of the responses that you think the city may have in terms of those challenges?
Well, yeah, I certainly respect the opinions of the people on the ground, and they're there and see exactly what's happening, and I thank them for the great work. But we have done many things in the city to try and do our part as much as we can. We have had city-funded intervention support team that provides homeless outreach to support the individuals experience or at risk of homelessness. And those individuals have done a magnificent job working with the other agencies in the city to try and find resolves to some of the issues we're seeing. And I acknowledge in the growth of unfortunately of homelessness and those at risk to homelessness. But we have provided, and it's been mentioned earlier, land to BC Housing to build two supportive housing buildings in Norland and Ledger, and thankfully operated by Progressive Housing. Great respect for Jade and the work that is done there. We have partnered with BC Housing to provide the emergency year-round shelter at Douglas Road and the winter shelter at the city's facility on Buller Avenue. These are huge changes since 2019, it has been mentioned. We have committed the mayor's commitment to housing through the mayor's task force of community housing, where we're trying to address many of the issues at hand. Also, our home strategy, Burnaby Housing and Homeless Strategy, and the mayor's task force on unsheltered community members. I think we've done some great work together to see what we can continue to improve on, and within the city's limits, of course. The implementation of the tenant assistance policy, Burnaby has the strongest tenant support for tenants in Canada to support renters in Burnaby impacted by redevelopment. So those are some of the things that have made a difference and will continue to make a difference. But there's still much more that can do, but we need great partnerships from all orders of government and those who are working on this, right at the street levels to ensure that we're improving all the time.
100% is definitely a lot of collaborations with all levels of government and also local groups and people, and making sure, I think Jade and Lorraine both touched on how, right, we need better understanding from our communities about this issue. Um, and actually on that, I have to say I've seen a lot of progress that has been made, especially I think with the Karen Mayor and Council here in Burnaby, that there were a lot of new initiatives and especially on the renters protection. I know Burnaby is definitely one of the best and a pretty good role model here in BC. But there's, of course, continues to be challenges. And maybe going back to Lorraine, on your work across BC, just kind of expand on this a little bit. Are you seeing support and response from BC municipalities and communities about the challenges we're facing right now and from other municipalities?
Thank you. And I do want to lift up my hands to the city of Burnaby. You have made amazing inroads in really important areas, and it shows what community can do when you actually come together. I think Metro Vancouver, we have some of the highest housing costs in the region, so that is a big significant factor. It won't be news to anyone in this room, but even a bachelor unit is going to be around $1,200 to $1,500. So that is so far out of the reach of people who have basic income assistance. We'll have that problem province-wide, but here in the Lower Mainland, it's really difficult to find any affordable housing in many ways. And so you have to start to look at how you can bridge that gap. And it leads to a different problem, though. So not only do we have a market that is unable to provide the kind of housing that people at the lower end need, but it's leading to people being without a place to live for a significant amount of time. So in the last homeless count, we now saw that 75% of anyone counted in that count had been without a place to live for more than a year. And in fact, that half had been without a place to live for 3 years, the last 3 years on and off having housing. And that can really affect people. And so again, the incredible work of the task force, and again, Burnaby has been incredibly creative in how you approach these issues, I think really does speak to understanding this need, that when you're without housing for that period of time, it takes people coming together to rebuild the trust, to really help people understand that there may be solutions available. And the solutions don't come obviously as fast as we want. And again, community efforts can really help to make that kind of difference. So I think those are some of the ways communities come together to start to bridge these gaps and try to remove the barriers.
100%. And for Jade, from your experience working here in Burnaby, but you've also worked with other cities as well, what do you think are the strategies that are most promising for preventing homelessness?
I agree with the panel. I think that our work really relies on the strong partnerships that we've created with BC Housing, with the City of Burnaby, with Fraser Health. And through that collaboration, we create problem solving and flexibility to really meet the unique needs of this community. We're increasing awareness around culture, traditions, the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in homelessness, recognizing that the diverse population often requires different culturally responsive approaches. And through using a trauma-informed and human-centered approach, we really work to try and ensure that marginalized individuals are not left behind in the face of the social and environmental changes. But again, through that collaborative piece, I'm really seeing some promising futures.
That's very important that, we, of course, there's many challenges, but we're also continue to track our progress. We've come a long way, and then there's definitely way more work to do, as the mayor has said. So kind of back to the mayor, you've mentioned about some of the steps that the city has been taking, and then maybe can we focus a little bit on the prevention part, right? What can municipalities like Burnaby do on the prevention side? And I understand definitely you need partners from different levels of government. So what is happening now? What's missing, and what would you like to see more?
Well, I think last night we had at council meeting, we had the Burnaby Shelter and Supportive Housing Strategy come to council, and that builds on the work that was done with our committee on the mayor's committee on those who are facing homeless challenges. So we're going to be enacting as much of that as we possibly can. But there's no doubt that we need further investments with the other levels of government, shelters, supportive housing, and complex care, which is something something that really needs to be addressed, because there are those that need extra help, and that complex care really needs to be something that that we address as quickly as possible. This strategy focuses on maintaining and expanding existing shelters and supportive housing, as well as transition steps for people looking for pathways out of homelessness. So I think those types of things are really what we will be focusing on as a city in conjunction with our partners. And, you know, some of the challenges, for example, Burnaby has yet to be selected as one of the heart and health funded community homeless encampments action response team by the ministry. And so we really need to get that into our city as well. This could support access to sport. This could support access to sports services, new shelters, and housing options. So you know, the challenges remain, but we will keep working with the partners and to ensure that Burnaby gets its share of what's out there. So those are the challenges.
Of course. And how do you feel about this, Lorraine, from the mayor's response about some of the challenges? And what do you think are the biggest barriers for service providers like you and like Jade and many other organizations to respond to the growing needs of the population?
I think it's a very powerful response from the city of Burnaby, in the sense that not all communities will accept the whole range of challenges. And in order to solve homelessness and bring real solutions forward, you do have to look across the continuum, from the independent affordable housing side right through to the complex care, and understand that there are so many different pathways into homelessness and equally number of pathways out of homelessness. Funding will always be a challenge. The housing that is available will always be oversubscribed, but it is the partnerships and really asserting what communities can do and bringing that voice forward. When I think of the needs in the community, and again, the tremendous work of the task force of really helping to amplify the voice of people with lived experience who have nowhere to go, I think that's such a critical part. I also am hopeful that the new federal programs will start to bring much needed dollars back into the community. It's hard to know because, again, it's still in the early days, but the federal government is talking about deeply affordable housing. And I think that is a really important part of the continuum, that for a while we were talking about the missing middle, to go deeper on affordability and then leverage community commitment and understanding. There could be real solutions.
100%. And before I go back to Jay to expand what Lorraine talked a little bit about, the complexity, right? There's so many factors, climate change, even extreme weather, migration, right? And mental health, that, you know, all the factors that impact what we're seeing on the ground, what you're seeing on the ground. Before I jump into that question, I just want to remind everybody who's watching this and participating, you can also add your questions in the chat. Caitlin has sent a message. Feel free to add your question in the chat. We're going to go into our Q&A soon, just to make sure everybody has some time to be able to ask our amazing panelists any questions that you would like to ask on this issue. So going to Jade about complexity. And I know progressive housing has, you know, some really important work about, you know, how you're addressing some of the emerging issues. So can you comment on that, and what are you seeing on the ground of those capacity of the individuals that you're serving? Again, I love what I think it was Lorraine earlier talked about, that those are not just numbers, those are people, individuals and families that you're serving on a daily basis.
Yeah. I think what is key is that we are integrating adaptability, harm reduction, and equity. It's so important to, in the face of change, really invest in staff development to strengthen the collective capacity, and so that we can be responding effectively and humanely in the face of, you know, the evolving face of homelessness and the reality of it. So reinvesting in staff development and being adaptable, really viewing people from a person-centered approach is key to staying on top of it. Of course, there's also things like having our winter shelters, having, good responses to the heat in the summer. And as a collective and working together, that's been hugely important.
Can I expand on that a little bit? You mentioned about staffing, and for Lorraine and Jade, both of you, right, working very closely on the front lines. Are there challenges of recruiting people to work in this sector to serve our most vulnerable neighbors? Feel
Yeah,
free to go. Yeah.
I think it's, I don't want to get it too much into if it's hard to find people, but I think giving our staff the appropriate supports to best work with the most vulnerable people and continuing to invest in their future, both emotionally, but also adapting with the changes to what the data that Lorraine sees. Right. So there's things that have changed over the last 5-10 years. And if without the appropriate education and integration, we would be lost.
How do you feel, Lorraine?
I would just add that the nonprofit sector in general has a certain amount of turnover, and that can be related even to burnout, right? That people just get too committed, and when you don't see the results you're hoping to see, it can just be hard to accept and people move on. At the same time, the sector's been able to attract incredibly committed people who believe beyond and will go beyond that typical 7 or 8 hour day because they know that the little efforts can make a huge difference. And so I think there's both sides of the equation on this. And again, I think that if you get the level of community support that the city of Burnaby is giving, you have that reason to believe change can actually happen. And so then you're able to attract people who see that the same way.
Hmm. And I think a lot of people don't know. I remember when I was MLA, and then we sometimes have groups coming in and talking about different issues. And the nonprofit sector is actually huge, and they tend to be the biggest employers in many municipalities, right? And they hire a lot of skilled professionals like you both right here, and then they worked with communities. They work on issues that's really close to families and our neighbors in the communities and the vulnerable, or on all types of different issues that impact people on a daily basis. But this is a sector sometimes that, unfortunately, the workers are also facing affordability issues and support and other challenges as well. So maybe going back to the mayor on this, I hear some really good praises, and personally I've seen how Burnaby has really been a leader in many social policies, or including housing and including homelessness issues. Um, how can municipalities work with nonprofits more on those emergency issues with so much complexity? And every issue is kind of connected to one another, right? Housing, affordability, jobs, economy, education, childcare, right? Mental health, healthcare. How can municipalities better support our nonprofit partners in this?
Well, I think we do have a good table, and there is great open door conversations going on between all the partners. That needs to continue and expand on that where we can. But at the same time, there's only so much we can do without support from Fraser Health and from the provincial government and the federal government, hopefully now coming to the table. That will give us a bigger boost. But I can't speak enough about the people who work on the ground. Two of our guests are here today, are part of that. But all are nonprofits in the city. They do such a wonderful job, and certainly I listen to what they have to say because they're the experts in the field. We're just trying to fill in the gaps that we can, and with their expertise, that's what we need to keep relying on to keep us alive to what's actually happening out there on the street.
Totally. And Mary, if you don't mind kind of expanding on this part as well, and I see some questions coming in that I'll get to in a few minutes. You as a mayor, of course, I've seen you advocating for Burnaby, and I've seen other municipalities advocating for their communities at UBCN, for example, right? A union of BC municipalities, or through the provincial governments through different meetings. And on housing, for example, now we have a federal minister, Gregor Robinson, right, who is a housing minister. Does that help with your advocacy? And what do you think are some of the things municipalities can do to ensure, because you're the ones, mayors and councillors are the ones in the community on a daily basis working with residents on those top issues. What would you say can be done, or what are your hopes to make sure the grassroots voice are passed on to provincial or federal government?
Yeah, well, Minister Robertson, I've met with quite a few times, and I'm hoping that is going to make a difference around housing and these issues that we have in the city. However, it's with the federal government, it's easy to get sidetracked because Ontario and Quebec are such big players, and they have different ways of doing business in BC, and sometimes that gets in the way. So it's very complex, but certainly we're always bringing the issues of our city to them, and they're certainly very well aware of our needs through what we bring to them, and we will continue to do that. But we need bigger investment. Someone earlier mentioned in deeply affordable housing, because really that's really the difference that the federal government and the provincial government can make. City can do some things for housing, giving land and a little bit of money, but that doesn't get you to deeply affordable units, which is what we really need in this sector. So we rely and will be pushing hard on the federal minister, to bring some of that funding to BC so that we can get to deeply affordable housing, as has been mentioned. $1,200 for a bachelor is still not affordable for most people, or for many people that we're talking about here. And so we need to find ways, and the only way we can get there is by that proper level of funding coming from the feds and the province.
Well, as a former colleague, I can say Mayor Hurley is definitely very good at advocacy. I remember all the calls and messages and meetings that we've had, and the regular connections that we've had. And I know it's so important for our politicians to also, I know the mayor and councillors and many of our local representatives also interact with local nonprofits on a regular basis. And I think it's really important to build that connection and those conversations. And I was very lucky that I actually want to give a shout out, especially that this event is hosted and moderated and supported by the End Homelessness in Burnaby. And I've seen how hard your workers work on the front lines during COVID, when we didn't need to go back to the legislative session for a while, unfortunately, but I had the opportunity to volunteer there on a regular basis and seeing the work that your staff has done. Working with a lot of incredible of your board members. I also saw, I think earlier, Carol Ann is here as well. That work on a daily basis is huge, and how much our vulnerable neighbors' needs, and being able to build connections among those neighbors, and also bringing in politicians, like me and like the mayor. Those experiences have really transformed me, not just for my political work, but also personally. So just hands up to all this incredible frontline workers. So I'm going to go to some of the questions. We actually had a few questions about prevention. I think Laura's question that's being added in the chat is a great question for our panelists, whoever wants to jump in to respond. So Laura's question is basically that it's been proven that childhood trauma during developmental years is a huge factor in creating vulnerable individuals. Are there free therapy with psychologists or specialists available to folks that are homeless? Sorry. Any of our panelists? Yeah, go ahead.
So a lot of our guests here are engaged with Burnaby Mental Health or the ACT team, which is fantastic. And we have just made a fantastic community partnership with Mosaic Community Health, who have given, I think, 98% of our shelter guests access to services that maybe as a newcomer to BC, it would take years to have. So getting a doctor for the everyday average person, myself, coming here, it could take years. Mosaic has really done exceptional work being advocates for our guests, our vulnerable people, to have access to nurse practitioners, doctors, social workers. I know they do work with immigration, lactation specialists, and so I can't speak highly enough of them. And I'm so grateful that they're part of, the community of Burnaby.
That's great. Anything else that want to be added from our panelists?
No, I would just like to say, and I'm certainly not an expert in this field, but the work that Mosaic's doing in their clinics has actually made a huge difference, and I thank them for their incredible work they continue to do.
Thank you so much. Okay, then the next question is a little connected as well from Caitlin, that she's asking, we also know mental health plays a big role in housing stability. How do you think investment in mental health research and support affect our ability as community to prevent and reduce homelessness here in Burnaby? And maybe across BC, Lorraine, you would like to jump in.
Oh, that's an important question. When you look at the data coming from the homeless count, you can see that mental health and addiction can be a factor in one's experience of homelessness, but sometimes it's also a result of being homeless. Having access to the services and supports and community connections is obviously huge in terms of helping to give people the stability they need to move forward in their housing. However, I'm going to add that in the most recent homeless count, we looked at how often eviction was a factor in people ending up experiencing homelessness. And the number was about 42% of everyone who was identified in the count had actually experienced eviction, with 44% of those being economic eviction. So they simply couldn't hold on to their housing. Now, having mental health supports around that too is incredibly, like, that is a traumatic experience. But we need to look at both, like what supports, mental health supports, but also the housing, so that people can regain that stability and just start moving forward again in their lives.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. And anything else that maybe you would like to add, Jade, in terms of mental health and what you're seeing on the ground, and especially in the shelters that you work in?
I think Lorraine actually mentioned it earlier, and it was a single word, and maybe we missed it. But I think, Lorraine, when you said that it was about rebuilding trust for people that have been marginalized, have experienced trauma, like you said, renoviction is a traumatic experience. I think if we collectively strive to rebuild trust and make that our focus instead of the tangible end of the race line. If we work to rebuild trust, I think we're going to see promising outcomes.
And in your experience, Jade, Lorraine, and maybe the mayor too, as a elected official and a representative, what are the key factors to building the trust?
I could speak to that first. I had read an amazing study actually that spoke to the importance of this, and it resonated, like this has stayed with me. The study was on global strategies for ending homelessness, and they were talking that for an outreach worker, it takes about 40 points of connection to build that trust, to build the trust to talk about your experience, what you need, what's happened to you. And so I started to think, if that outreach worker is meeting a person once a week, then that is still almost a year before someone really gets the supports they need. So it speaks to the importance of that outreach worker. It speaks to the importance of just building trust and that kind of belief that you can get back in and that you can start to move forward. And so it was 40 points of connection before people really have that sense of confidence in that relationship.
Anything? Go ahead, Jade.
I think if we continue to meet people where they're at, and we provide consistency, that's hugely beneficial for building those 40 points of trust as well.
I've seen some amazing work. I remember when Burnaby was facing the challenges of demoviction, unfortunately, in a Metrotown area, and I was a school trustee at the time. And some of the work that has done between the city. The city was kind of a different situation, different leadership at the time, but then also with local nonprofit, but at least some of the city staff and professionals and the school district. And I never thought that, school district professionals could, is so close to this housing crisis, right? And how they supported the families and the children who are being impacted by dam eviction and a housing crisis. I thought that was, even though it was a really challenging situation, and of course we've, got better and with our policies since then, but that was also meaningful that the trust that was built and the support that was available between all partners. And I was really thankful for a lot of the school district professionals that also, even though housing is not in their right in part of their public education work, but they really jumped in and they really make sure they were there for the families and helping them to find solutions, working with local partners. So thank you so much for all of your great work. And I know many of the participants here are also working on the front lines and serving families in different capacities from different organizations. So just really thank you for that, connection that you're building to support others. So our next question is to the mayor. I don't know if the mayor, you're reading the question as well, but what is your specific plan to actively engage our school system? Oh, we just talked about schools as a central partner in the city's homelessness prevention strategy, and what concrete steps will you take to make that happen? And thank you for this question.
Yeah, thanks. We're in touch with the school board and the all the time. We're a little surprised that they weren't more engaged in the homelessness count this time. But we're discussing these issues with school board trustees and the staff always, and they come and be part of our committees that meet on these issues as well, and we'll continue to do that work. They're critical, and they must be engaged in the process as well, because they touch areas that none of the rest of us can touch, and that's youth at schools and youth who are struggling at schools. So it's incumbent on us and the school board and the staff of the school board, along with our staff, to ensure that we're having these conversations at all times so that we can address the issues that we can, or at least bring attention to those who can make a difference in these areas, and hopefully point people in the right direction to find the help that they need. And that's what our action team are doing now within the city, the 5 people that we have hired to do this work, and they're doing incredible work out there. So we'll continue to work together to see what that we're doing as much as we possibly can.
How about Jade and Lorraine? Have you seen some good examples of collaborations with municipalities and also with school district and professionals working in the education sector?
I was just going to say, not for myself, mostly because my area would be with adults specifically. And so that's not something that I see a lot of. But with respect to the education component, again, going back to the municipalities, I can just point to our winter shelter as a keen success. The Buller shelter wouldn't be what it was without the city's assistance and support. But with respect to education, I don't think I can comment really.
And I was just going to echo a bit of what the mayor had also said around the important role of the school districts. So when we look at the most recent homeless count data, we see that the number of youth is going down. And so people want to know, should we declare victory on that? But the truth is, youth are always going to be hidden. It's a hidden part of the homelessness continuum. And so often sofa surfing and relying on other measures often have connection to systems of care that are failing them. And so the school districts are often the ones that can best understand that. And about 5 years ago, or around 2018, we actually did a targeted youth count, and we actually found upwards of 600 youth who would be described as experiencing homelessness or precariously housed in the region. And so while I think the most recent homeless count was something like 72, you can see the whole hidden side of this. And then the other number that I love that the panel has been talking about families. So again, often the point in time count is looking more at singles and those who have chronic homelessness. But if you look at across the Metro Vancouver region in the last census, so 2021 census, 43,000 households, renter households in the region, were spending more than 50% of their income on their housing. And so these are your precariously housed that they're one paycheck away from homelessness. And many of those will be families with youth who then experience the consequences as well. And so to me, that's an important part of the whole problem.
Lorraine, I really appreciate you sharing your expertise about data, but also knowing that there are the missing gaps, amount of data that we have. I remember we had a family right here in our community that it was precarious housing. It's a family of five, and they actually unfortunately had to be separated. The mom and the daughter has to be in one home, and then the dad and two sons has to be in another one. And also there's some challenges with the age of different shelters or housing. And then it took them a really long time to be able to find a place for a family of five. I remember that family was back and forth between the school district and my office, and then we were trying to find solutions, but it was so hard. And I just, for those of us who has the roof over our head, we were just really, privileged, and to, every day I feel like there's someone out there who's struggling. And then those families may not be caught in those data, right? Because they try to go to a friend here and a friend there, and then, they go to a shelter once in a while, but they come back. And just to that kind of imagine a family of being separated in that way because of housing is really heartbreaking. So thank you for what you just shared. And I know in the chat, and I encourage more people to join us in the chat for more questions. I thank BC Brostol Association, hopefully I pronounced that right, for your message, and then sharing your links, that the services that you provide. And of course, we talked about trauma-informed services as well, which is really critical, especially, I'm myself as a survivor of gender-based violence, who understand the impact of trauma. I think trauma is definitely something that we have to be aware of how long it could take. Like I have a lot of privileges in my life that I was able to come back and recover from my trauma. It's a lifelong journey, but we try our best. But I have a lot of tools in my life, whereas I've, met a lot of people who don't have the support or don't have the family or the friends around that could really lift them up. And being able to heal from a traumatic experience or from the trauma that has happened in our life is really critical. So thank you for sharing that in the chat. The next question is from Teresa, who is asking, what do they see the federal government's role in supporting homeless in Burnaby? Maybe going to the mayor and see if you have any feedback. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, especially, it's great that we have a housing minister. We have a more direct connection here in Burnaby, but still, there's a lot the federal government can do. And, one example I thought about is the investment, right, in maybe 30, 40 years ago in co-ops. Like, my old riding in Burnaby, East Burnaby Logie area has the vast number of co-ops in the Lower Mainland. And those are great examples of housing that the federal government invested many, many years ago. But can we see more of that, or any other initiatives the federal government can support to support homelessness?
Well, I talked about it a bit earlier. If we're going to get to this level of affordability that we need to support helping people to get out of the homeless situation, or help those who are struggling to pay their rent right now, I think that help really needs to come from the federal government. They're the ones that, like, I think it's 70% of the taxes for the country, and so they're the ones that really need to come to the plate and assist us with that. But I also think that, on the mental health side, there can be more done from the federal government to support the strategies around how we deal with mental health issues, and how we deal with addiction issues, which are usually tied. So the federal government can certainly, but I think it would really help if we could ever get there. And I've asked for it for so long. If the three levels of government could actually sit down and have a real conversation about how we're going to tackle homelessness, mental health issues, and addiction issues, and try to work together instead of pointing the finger at each other. I think that's how we could really get to some real solutions if we're all pulling in the same direction and really, really trying to have some answers to these solutions. So I think that's what's really needed, and that the federal government should lead that charge to ensure that the three orders of government sit down and have real conversations about real solutions, being informed by the people who work on the ground. And I think that's the challenge that we really all have to get to, is do we really want to solve these issues, or do we really want to pat ourselves in the back when we do one good thing? As we all know, it's much broader than one thing. So let's, if I had one ask from the federal government, that would be it. Let's get the three orders of government together and start to come up with some real solutions.
100%. I totally echo with that. I feel like the best policies that are ever made are from our communities. It's not from the meeting rooms in the chamber sometimes, right? In the legislature or in the House of Commons. It's the voices of the people and from the grassroots that has the real solutions. But it's just so important how we connect on a regular basis and to make sure that there's accountability, there's conversations, but people who are making decisions in those chambers are really listening from our community. So thank you, Mayor, for that. We have about 10 minutes left, and I definitely want to, make sure we get all the questions in. So there is an additional question from Caitlin about, for those who are hidden homeless, what can we do to support them more, particularly women, since they are more likely to be hidden homeless and have children or play some sort of caregiving role? And this is such an important question, because we know whenever we have faced challenges like the COVID-19 pandemic or any type of, economical or challenging situations, the gender equity part, you see how women are mostly being impacted the most. So any answers and response from our panelists to this question? And also from Caitlin, a call to action for the task force.
So if I could just jump in, I would say that this question in a way supports what the mayor had just spoken about bringing all levels of government together, because those who are hidden homeless or precariously homeless could well end up in the emergency shelters or on the streets the next day. And so if you have that conversation across all levels of government, you can really start to understand where we might be able to have impact. And I think that back in the day when we had a federal social housing program, everyone in core housing need was considered eligible for social housing. That no longer is going to be reality, but even these 43,000 families and individuals I talked about who are spending 50% or more of their income on their housing costs, what are their choices and options and futures? And again, all levels of government will have an understanding of part of the solution, and community best knows and understands the needs. So in a way, it would be exciting if we could bring all levels together. One other small data point, and I know I'm living in the past, so we can't use this for the future, but back when we had a true social housing program in 1995, when the federal government pulled out of social housing, BC was guaranteed 2,400 units of housing a year. 1,800 were funded by the federal government and 600 by the province. And when the feds pulled back, the province continued with their 600 unit commitment. But obviously you can see that the hole got deeper and darker and wider without the 1,800 federal units. I sometimes do the math, it's wishful thinking, but if you look at where we'd be today, if we could have continued with 2,400 units, you would see how much further ahead we would be on those in core housing need, on this extreme housing need that we're seeing, and even on homelessness. And I should still show respect and thanks to the federal government, because I am the chair of the Reaching Home Community Advisory Board, and those are federal dollars that are going into community to help address the homelessness issue. But it is important to look at that whole continuum of housing and what is leading to some of the homelessness.
I think to springboard from those two thoughts too, there's some people that do not have the capacity to live independently. And so finding sort of wraparound supports like a supportive housing or transitional housing option for those to not only have a house, but also have the supports that are necessary, both holistically, mentally, physically. I think that's imperative.
100%. And I want to thank Laura for actually speaking of solutions. She's sharing that in Germany, they don't know low income housing in entire, they don't have low income housing in entire neighborhoods. They place the people in staggered housing amongst middle class and upper class and find that low income families become more successful in their lives due to the support of the communities. It ends generational welfare. And maybe that is something that can be integrated into the system. And thank you, Laura, for sharing that example. Maybe that's something the mayor and all of our frontline workers can bring to different levels of governments in the conversation. But I do want to jump into maybe our last question for today, which I think is a really great question to wrap up from Joyce. She's asking, how could investing in housing and services actually save money for all levels of government, which is a critical question. Every time I hear about budget concerns and worried about cuts and everything, and I often, through kind of my personal years of working in politics as well, that when you don't invest in people, you actually cost more money down the road. So how would you all, our panelists, respond to that?
Well, from my position as mayor, it's absolutely right on the money. It costs much more to have people on the street than it does to actually, have proper housing and housing that can be afforded. But it's not just about money. I mean, housing should be a right. Everyone should have a home as their base. So while the money argument is a very good one, I still believe that the very basics of keeping people healthy, giving them the opportunity to deal with any issues they may have, all starts from having a solid base and a solid home that everyone can afford. And I think that's really the key to having the kind of society that we all want to live in. So while the cost is very true, it's much more cost efficient to keep people housed. But it's not just about money; it's about being the right thing to do. So I really appreciate that the opportunity to speak to that.
Thank you. And comments from Lorraine and Jade as we wrap up this webinar? Go ahead, maybe Lorraine?
Oh, I was just going to say Jade, who works close to the ground, probably would be the right person to speak also to what the mayor just said so beautifully. So I'm going to say over to Jade.
I think that was a wonderful way to end this. And I think it's one thing that I tell my teams pretty consistently, just to springboard off of that, is that the reality is that you or I are only essentially one or two life events from being in the same position as the people that we serve. And so I think if we were to monetize the price of empathy, we just couldn't do it. And I think always making that the prevalent thought when we go in and we do the work that we do and how we educate and share, let that lead the way.
That's such a beautiful conclusion for this webinar. And education is definitely key, and that is the reason why we're doing this webinar series. This is one of the three webinars we're going to do. And I just want to, again, give a big shout out to Caitlin and your team, the Society to End Homelessness in BC, for organizing this and bringing everybody together. And I love what Jade said at the end about empathy, right? Empathy is key. Empathy can transform the world, and whereas apathy is our biggest enemy. If we don't care enough about our neighbors, everybody living in a community, it's going to be really challenging for us to address all the challenges. So I want to thank you for sharing your positive energy with us, to our panelists and for our organizers. And Caitlin, just want to remind everybody that our next webinar will be on December 10th for the Human Rights Day. As the mayor has said really nicely, that housing is a human right. So thank you so much, everybody, for participating in our webinar today. And I hope you all have a wonderful day and continue to celebrate and raise more awareness about the Homelessness Action Week.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.